Hello, welcome to Story Time with Mrs. Lazalier. I was hoping Mrs. Springs would read this for you. You know, the one with the great voice that sometimes does end of the day announcements and how relaxing her voice is. But I'll do the best I can to mimic that for you. Probably not very well. So, since we're not at school where I can play the Audible version, and you're welcome to get Audible or get the Audible version of Moon Over Manifest if that's okay with your parents. But I'm going to go ahead and read it for you. So, here it is. Curled up on my couch with my puppies at my feet. They'll probably be on my lap before this is over. But we're going to start where we left off on page 26. Sacred Heart of the Holy Redeemer Elementary School. So on page 26, go ahead and open up your book with me. And there are going to be some places where I'm going to ask you to highlight things or make a note of this for your questions. So first off, Sacred Heart of the Holy Redeemer tells me that this is probably a religious school, probably a Catholic school. So let's find out. The date is May 28th, 1936. You'd have thought I'd be used to this by now, being the new kid and all. I'd been through this umpteen times before, but it never gets any easier. Still, there's certain things that every school's got the same as any other, and I know this is something you're going to need for your questions. Universals, I call them. Well, if something's universal, it means it works with many different things or it works everywhere. So a universal remote can be programmed to work with lots of different TVs and other things that require a remote. I started to say VCRs, and that makes me really, really old. So does DVDs. She calls these her universals. Walking into the schoolhouse, I smelled the familiar chalky air, heard fidgety feet rustling under desks, felt the stairs. I took a seat near the back. My one consolation was that I knew these kids, even if they didn't know me. Kids are universals too, in a way. Every school has the ones who think they're a little bit better than everybody else, and the ones who are a little poorer than everyone else, and somewhere in the mix there's usually ones who are pretty decent. Those are the ones who made it hard to leave when the time came, and sooner or later it always came. So this goes with she's traveled a lot. She's had to move with her dad from town to town a lot. Now, I want you to underline the word consolation. That's one of your vocab words, and in the packet that I gave you before we left, and if you left it at school, I'm going to post it on the portal for you, but consolation is one of your vocab words. So my one consolation was that I knew these kids. So let's think about what that means. The one thing that made this any better was that I knew these kids. Now, did she actually know the kids? Or does she just know what kinds of kids there are anytime you have a large group of people together? So she's basically saying everywhere you go, no matter where you are, people have these things in common. I guess I'd never find out who was who around there, it being the last day of school and all. The books were already stacked on shelves for the summer. The blackboard was just that, black. So, like our first book, The Wednesday Wars, this is before smartboards, before dry erase markers, where there were chalkboards, and you had that little layer of chalk everywhere. I'm not that old, but we had that in my classes too. No math problems, no spelling words. Then a girl with a rosy round face spoke up. I bet you're an orphan. So Letta Taylor, a skinny red-haired girl scolded, why would you say such a thing? She came in on the train without a mama or a daddy, didn't she? It was all the talk at the Five and Dime. Well, maybe you shouldn't be listening to all the talk. Besides, that doesn't mean she's an orphan. The girl twisted one of her red braids and looked at me. Does it? My face was hot and probably red, but I squared my shoulders. My mother's gone to that sweet by and by. I said it loud enough for everybody to hear since they were all ear-cocked anyway. So ear-cocked, listening. Some gave kind of sympathetic looks for my loss. I didn't figure it was a lie, since who knew for certain what the sweet by and by was? Most folks seemed to think it meant she'd died and gone to a better place. But in my book, it just meant she'd decided that being a wife and mother wasn't all it was cracked up to be. And when I was 2, she joined a dance troupe in New Orleans. But since I had no memory of my mother, it was hard to miss her. So her mother isn't really dead, but she tells people she's gone to that sweet by and by, which people automatically assume means she's died, but Abilene figures this really isn't a lie because she really doesn't know where she is. But I continued, answering their next question before they could ask it. I got a daddy. I'd often been asked about my mother, but until now I'd never had to explain the whereabouts of Gideon. They'd always been together. It wasn't fair, him putting me in this predicament. Go ahead and underline predicament. That's another vocab word. And predicament is like a sticky situation. So on your vocab page, look for a definition that would fit that. He's working a railroad job back in Iowa. He says it's not fit living for a girl of my age, so I'm here for the summer. I didn't say that the railroad had been fit living for me pretty near my whole life, and I didn't see why this summer should be any different. But he's coming back for me by the end of the summer. For some reason, my words rang a little hollow. Wasn't sure if it was the look that Hattie Mae and Shady had exchanged the day before, or the look of pity on some of those kids' faces just then. Maybe they knew someone else who got left for good. But Gideon was coming back for me, and I'd have a few choice words for him when he arrived. See, Letty, I told you she's not an orphan, said the red-haired girl. I figured Letty must be short for Soletta. They're cousins, said a freckled-faced boy in overalls, as if that explained everything. Your daddy ever seen anyone get flattened by a train? What kind of question's that? Oh, it's the next line of the book. Now, what kind of question is that? It was Letty who said it. Come on, Ruth Ann. You jumped on me for asking a dumb question. What about Billy's? It ain't a dumb question, Billy said. My granddad used to work at the depot, and he tells a story about how a fella got hit by a train in Kansas City, and dead as he was, he stayed on that engine car all the way to the Manifest Depot. Nobody wanted to peel him off, and since he had a round-trip ticket, they left him there all the way back to Kansas City. Sounds like a tall tale. I heard a story like that, Letty said, only it was about a boy who rode a 3-legged horse all the way to Springfield and... Pardon me. Would you two hush up with your stories and let the poor girl tell her own? Ruth Ann scolded. All eyes were back to me. I don't suppose I have any story to tell, but my name's Abilene. That ain't a name, that's a place, said Billy. You from the one in Kansas or the one in Texas? Neither. It doesn't matter where she's from, said a girl with fancy curls that looked like they were done in a beauty parlor. She raised her eyebrow and looked down her nose at me. The fact is, she's living in a saloon and a stone's throw from that spooky Miss Sadie's divining parlor. My mother says that place is nothing but a den of iniquity. The only places I'd been seen within a stone's throw from Shady's place were the cemetery and that broken-down shack of a house with perdition written on the gate. Truth was, I didn't know what a divining parlor or a den of iniquity was, but you can bet I plan to find out. Shut up, Charlotte, and give the girl a chance to talk, Ruth Ann said. Well, where are you from? Where's your home? That question always came up real quick. It was a universal. That's going to be important. And I was ready for it. All over. My daddy says it's not down in any map. True places never are. Another voice, an older voice, spoke from the back of the room. I see your father is well versed in the works of Herman Melville. Suddenly, chairs scooted back and the whole class stood. Good morning, Sister Redempta. Moby Dick, to be precise. Good morning, class. I see you've had ample time to meet your new classmate and welcome her with tales of dead bodies and dens of iniquity. She raised an eyebrow to the class. I gathered it was a woman since they called her sister, but since she was covered in black with only her face peeking out, what looked like a little white box, it was hard telling. Gideon says a rose is a rose, but when it comes down to it, there's some more rosy and some more thorny. I didn't know yet if she was a rose or a thorn, but one thing I knew for sure, she wasn't any universal. She was a towering figure gliding solemnly to the front of the room. Her posture was straight and formal. The only movement about her was the swaying of a long strand of wooden beads wrapped around her waist and extending down to her knees. I caught the scent of lye soap as she walked past. Strong as it was, she must be a believer in cleanliness being next to godliness. You heard that saying, cleanliness is next to godliness? And she wasn't taking any chances. It did occur to me to find it strange for a Baptist minister to send me to a Catholic school. Sometimes religious folks draw pretty deep lines in the sand. But having seen Shady's place, which was also part church, part saloon, part workshop, I could tell his lines were a bit fuzzy. Sister Redempta placed a stack of papers on her desk. I'm sure you're eagerly awaiting your final report cards. There was a good amount of moaning and shuffling. Rest assured you have all received marks that are fair and representative of your work throughout the past year. She picked up the first paper in the stack. Billy Clayton. Billy walked to the front. Sister, he nodded, accepting the paper as he shuffled back. Those freckles got lost in the red rising in his cheeks. Charlotte Hamilton. Miss Beauty Parlor pranced to the front of the room. Thank you, sister. She smiled at everyone on the way back, but hearing the yelp she let out afterward, I thought she'd set on attack. Her hand shot up. Sister Redempta, I'm afraid there's been a mistake. There is a B marked beside catechism. Religion. I'm aware of that, Charlotte. I graded your final exam, and among other things, I do believe that wearing black to a funeral or giving I do not believe that wearing black to a funeral or giving last year's feather bonnet to your sister can be classified as corporal works of mercy. So not sacrifices. May Hughes, she continued, Ruth Ann McIntyre, Noah Rousseau, Soletta Taylor. It was almost worth having to go to school just to see everybody itching and squirming. After looking at her report card, Letty Taylor slouched in her seat and whispered to Ruth Ann, Charlotte better air out her black dress for a funeral because my mama's going to kill me. I was sitting pretty as each name was called, knowing mine would not be among them. It was her first day after all. Abilene Tucker. I must have been smiling for a while because all of a sudden my mouth hurt from changing position so fast. Sorry. You are Abilene Tucker, Sister Redempta said, it as if I'd been wondering about that for some time. I understand that you've just arrived, and unfortunately that leaves me with no basis on which to give you a grade for this term. Yes, ma'am, I said. Ain't it a shame, I thought. Therefore, you will have a special assignment to complete during the summer. Assignment? Summer? A rose is a rose, but she was sprouting thorns. All right. I am pleased that your ears are in such able condition. Let us put your mind to the test as well. It seems everyone is fond of a good story, dead bodies on trains notwithstanding. Therefore, your assignment will be to write a story of your own. You may select the topic and it will be graded for grammar, spelling, punctuation, and creativity. It will be due September 1st. She didn't wait for any ifs, ands, or buts from me. Good thing, too, as I couldn't think of a thing to say, but I didn't have any plans of still being in Manifest come September. If you need help getting started, she peered out her white box at the class. I am quite certain there are some students who would be happy to offer their assistance. There was a god-awful quiet as nobody even looked my way. Nobody wanted to help her over the summer. Then Letty Taylor chanced to shoo a fly off, and quicker than an auctioneer, that woman pegged her. She thought she was volunteering. Thank you, Soletta. Perhaps your mother will allow you a stay of execution for a few months. Meaning, maybe she won't kill her for her grade. Ruth Ann laughed behind her hand. And Ruth Ann, a kind gesture on your part. Oh, she thought she was volunteering too. As for the rest of you, she shot an evil eye at the class, it would do you well to remember for the next term that acts of charity and kindness are also taken into consideration in one's overall grade. Charlotte's hand shot up again. I'd be happy to help the poor girl, sister. She gave me a pitiful look. I'd even help her find some more suitable clothes. Something a little less traveled. That won't be necessary, Charlotte. I'm sure Abilene will have quite enough help. Now let us stand for prayer. The class stood and Charlotte flipped her hair around. No matter, she whispered over her shoulder. I'm spending most of the summer with relatives in Charleston. You know, South Carolina. She was suddenly talking with a southern accent. Pity, though, I would have thought clothing the poor in taste would have been defined as a corporal work of mercy. Snooty rich girl is a universal.